Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Crushing Comics. And we are here to continue our epic X-Men reread together with Fariha and Tyler. Today, we are digging into Uncanny X-Men 107 and 108, both by Chris Claremont. And very interestingly, this is where the handoff on art occurs between Cockrum and Byrne. So we're definitely going to have a little bit to say about that. Along with these, we're also reading classic X-Men issues number 14 and 15. They contain some revisions for these issues because Claremont went back and did his own remastering, as well as some backup stories that relate very closely to these stories, even though they were set in the past. And then also, Iron Fist 15 is kind of Uncanny X-Men 108.5. You'll understand when we get there. It's also drawn by Byrne. So we're going to mention it, but we're not going to go super, super deep. But here's what we are going to go super, super deep into. Everything about X-Men. So if you wish to be unspoiled about X-Men, not just this part of X-Men, but pretty much X-Men full stop, this might not be the right episode or podcast for you because we're going to refer to the vast, lengthy history of X-Men, especially Tyler's going to do that. And we could even mention things all the way up to Jonathan Hickman's House of X and Powers of X, although based on what goes on in these issues, I don't think you have to beware too much House of X, Powers of X spoilers. So if we happen to go in that direction, we'll be sure to give you ample warning. So with that long preamble completed, let's begin issue 107, which sees Cockrum having to design a whole heck of a lot of characters because we meet the whole Shi'ar Imperial Guard and the whole Starjammers all in one issue. So, Fariha, you know a lot of these characters because you know modern cosmic Marvel really well. What did you think about, like, this is the first issue with Gladiator. Like, this is it.
So I was excited to see where it all started, right? You know, so even though I was kind of like a little bit sad that I wish I didn't know, some of these things, especially with the familial connection between a couple of characters, which obviously everyone knows it now, but it was like the first time it was revealed.
It's shocking. It's so shocking.
Yeah, and then, it was also like another incident. I should start counter. Like, number of times Jean and Professor X just rammed into people's brain without consent, So it kind of also, happened because of that. But yeah, so it was kind of exciting to see that this is the beginning of all of these characters, Some of these we don't remember, and, but some of these are like, sticks around for a very long time.
Tyler, what about you? Do you have a great love for these Imperial Guard characters and Starjammers characters?
I do. I mean, not so much the Starjammers because I don't. Okay, the reason why not so much the Starjammers is because I have not read the entire War of Kings saga. So that's one thing. The other thing is also I read the initial Starjammers miniseries by Cockrum, and it was a little bit boring.
They are boring. So the thing is, like, I will say though, fruit didn't fall far from the tree. All the summers are boring. They're boring. Except for that insane one.
Insane one.
But
yeah.
Sorry.
But I mean, Imperial Guards, I thought they were wonderfully varied, and their powers are very different, and and I really enjoy them. I mean, I can't remember when it was revealed that like the way that Gladiator's powers work, but that was, I thought, brilliant because it was like not tied to anything but himself.
So the question is, like, in Wolverine and the X-Men, there's like one character that is like
the kid
of a kid. That's this guy's kid, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Kid Gladiator.
Kid Gladiator, who is like, just full of like, just like so like bro, like, space bro. So I remember that kid, and I'm like, oh, this is that. Okay, I'm glad that that's the connection.
I will say that before Dave Cockrum has to dive into designing something like 20 characters, the first page here is really one of, I think, his most beautiful pages. It's radiant. And he draws, this looks more like the next Cockrum run when he comes back after Byrne. This just is like so much more mature. And I don't know what it is about it. There's something about the layout of the page and the way he draws Nightcrawler, but it's just really, beautiful, and I'm very fixated by it. Then after that, I think things get a little rough because he's just drawing so much stuff.
There's a lot of stuff.
And the same for Claremont. He has to just juggle so many moments that I think a lot of my satisfaction here comes from knowing who some of these Imperial Guard members are from Dark Phoenix Saga when we get a much smaller slice of the Guard. But I do think that it kind of impresses upon you that this is a huge society. Like the Shi'ar, it's not just like the Kree and not just like the Skrulls who we've met at this point, where it's primarily that one race that the Shi'ar has subjugated or ruled over or colonized this huge swath of space, and that there's like really not even that many Shi'ar people involved in this, but they are still the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, and it's kind of multinational. It's also, I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's supposed to make us think a little bit of Legion of Superheroes. And so I think that there's that aspect to it too, because they all have very varied, kind of crazy all over the place looks.
I mean, that's the thing with some fictional alien culture. Usually it is very mono. So it's mono species, right? Whereas in this case, this is an empire. So it has a lot of different species of aliens involved. It's just like, it's just the way, like Earth, even though we are kind of mono species, but we have different race and different kind of interactions. So that's something which not a lot of alien culture has been presented that way before.
Yeah, at this point in the Marvel Universe. Yeah.
Correct.
The other thing, too, is that the fight feels really different. Last time we were talking about how repetitive the fights are getting. But this one, I don't know if there's just because there's more things for them to bounce off of, but it just feels more unique. Like Wolverine has an actually fun moment, maybe the first fun Wolverine moment, so far in this Claremont run, where he's like fighting, and he like takes the other guy's clothes because he doesn't want to be out there in the all together. I think Nightcrawler gets a lot to do here, and it's like one of the moments, other than in the Juggernaut fight, where like Claremont remembers like Nightcrawler's good for stuff, and they're all like, "How do we get to the laundry?" And he's like, "Hi, I teleport." So it just kind of feels like, and then also Nightcrawler using his image inducer to back off the other guy who's a big creature. It just kind of feels like this is the beginning of him having a little bit more of a handle on stuff, even though there's just so many characters that there's barely enough time for anything to happen.
To me, I felt like that it felt a little bit different because there was more character that was introduced. So you could have, instead of like what we talked before, that all the X-Men running up to one character, versus now there is different character that each X-Men can run towards. And it seems like there was like a little bit of power, either opposing powers or the kind of similar powers, so you can kind of stack them with each other. So that was also kind of happening. So you kind of get to learn about what all these other characters can do. They learn about their power and also kind of see that how X-Men can also use theirs. The question also remains, not a lot of days have passed between them. So why are they so effective here, but not effective there?
Right. It's not like they had a big training session in between this.
Right. Yeah, so that's more of like the nitpicky side of it. It's like, okay, like, I know that for me, no time has passed, but people, when they were reading it, probably a month has passed. But as far as these X-Men were concerned, from their vacation, or 2 months, from this X-Men were concerned, it was from the vacation from Muir Island to now, not even 24 hours have passed. So...
And talking about nitpicking, right? Cyclops is like, let's listen to what they have to say. And then the moment Gladiator mentioned that, Lilandra is a traitor, he's like, he shoot his eye beams into the guy beside Gladiator. I was like, wait, what happened to just listen to and talking first?
He didn't like the voice, probably.
He's like,
time out. I changed my mind. Please. Stop talking
Well, and just
So-
before that happens, we get, or maybe just after in that sequence, we finally get the full Eric the Red reveal that like this whole time, Eric the Red has just been a Shi'ar agent who took on like a familiar look on Earth, just to manipulate all this stuff to try to make sure that nobody would be there to receive Lilandra when she gets to Earth because they want her because she's the rebel. Was it worth it? Did we need the Eric the Red plot thread manipulating all these?
Not at all. And then this is something that, like, it's like how many issues we have read so far from 90, like, Giants X, not Giants, that's kind of different, from 96 to now. It's like all this could have been, like, it's like so much happened, but it's actually nothing happened. Like, this information could have been given in like 2 issues and it would be just the same. I'm like, please, and I completely understand. It's just
it's why I tell people they shouldn't necessarily start from the beginning of Claremont. Like, it's not that thrilling.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, the plot was dumb, everything was dumb, and it's like, we talked about it before. It's like, all these people kind of look into like Earth as like this backspace, and so I'm like, well, your idea is dumb too. Like, you guys are not all that better. Like, so it's like, what was that about? And also Lilandra going up to Professor X, really, girl.
Well, they shared a moment, a psychic moment, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
So, but here, let me offer a potential counterpart to that, and then see which side Tyler comes down on. This is what Claremont has clearly wanted to be doing all along. And it's like he was handed a superhero book and he wanted to do space opera. And this guy like bided his time for 12 issues, which took about 2 years to release, of hints so that he could finally do this crazy space opera thing. And clearly he goes back to this, again, and it's what he wanted to do with X-Men, but it's also like, here we go. This is the beginning of X-Men as space opera, and you never can remove it from each other, just in the same way that eventually X-Men becomes synonymous also with time travel, because Claremont keeps going back to that well. Yeah. So it's like, as much as we can say that he was treading water a little bit in issues up to this point, like, he probably was just waiting to know that the sales were good enough that he could do space opera and get away with it, right? But Tyler, I don't know, which side do you come down on between the two of us?
I mean, it's pretty obvious that he's still learning his craft. So and so as he was like improving in his writing, the stories improve together with it. And then, as he gets a better handle of each character, and he doesn't sort of mess up their powers, things becomes a little bit more coherent. And I do believe that this is kind of like the start of it. So the moment that they went to space, everything kinds of like started to gel together. It could be because of the artist that's coming in next issue, but it could also be, he has been planning a lot of things. He has been seeding a lot of things, and he became a little bit, I mean, his grand plan, at least for the near future, becomes a little bit clearer. And also it is shaped by the person that he's working with. So I'm curious actually to see how Iron Fist, which he wrote during this period of time, does it have that kind of stumbling that, these early X-Men stories has? Like, does he fail to, I mean, is he a little bit more tighter in his writing? Because in Iron Fist, maybe there's only like 3 main characters that he needs to focus on. Whereas here, you have the old guard, you have the new guard, you have the a lot of villains coming in, and he's introducing a lot of supporting characters here. So,
yeah, I mean, if we just ran through what he's created, aside from just these 2 issues, I mean, we have Mora, we have Black Tom. There's been a lot of really significant creationism going on here. But I think the one thing that he does towards the end of the issue here, which is the moment that I always take with me from this issue, is Jean doing her rude psychic mind scan of Corsair and coming away with... Which at the time, like, who could he be? Of course, it gets revealed in the next issue, but Jean doesn't reveal it to Scott. And it's just like such a great, I mean, he's clearly a human amongst all of these alien people. And I mean, he looks human. We don't know for sure that she's human. And then she's like American slang and accents. Yeah. And she looks into his, and it's just one of those great Claremont moments, but it's also one of the first times that and you could prove me wrong, Tyler. I think it's one of the first times Claremont really starts to monkey with the actual X-Men origins, because he doesn't have many of the originals here other than Cyclops and Jean.
Yeah.
And then here's him going like, okay, let's spice Cyclops up a little bit. Let's go. Which really he hasn't done too much so far.
Yeah.
And he will continue to do in many other
He'll continue to like pepper everything, putting in little things. I mean,
So to that point though, like we saw Jean's parents before,
Yes.
This issue. So are Jean's parents also a new thing, like Claremont edition, or they were there before?
That's a good question. I'm trying. I mean, I think they dropped her off at the school at one point. Like we knew that Jean's parents were alive.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely know that because I think the way Jean powers manifested was already canon, right? It's not a Claremont thing. So definitely her parents were there. There is, I mean, the old guard, I don't think he had a lot, he could do a lot of things. But before he went back and, put in some history to Cyclops, the new guard, he has been doing quite a bit, especially for Storm.
Yeah.
Right.
And just to be clear, they did appear in X-Men 5 ever so briefly back in the 60s. And then canonically, without looking at any kind of like retroactive inserts, the next time we saw them was in 104. So he did his research, he found them in a past issue, and he returned them. But it's not like they popped up all through the Silver Age.
Right. No, I mean, that's one of the things I could do. Is just I was kind of sad to know that. I'm like, I already know this. But, it just like the first reveal. I was like, oh, yeah. Like, it was just the same with, like, Darth Vader revealing, like, I am your father. And I'm like, oh, cool, I already know this. Like,
Was it for you from the perspective of, like, here's how this started? Especially because you actually do know this character, which isn't always the case for X-Men characters, right? Is it the same thrill that when we see early Emma Frost, you're like, ooh, Emma? Is it kind of like, oh, Corsair, oh, this is... Because did you know that this is how they met? Like, in the middle of this McCran crystal nonsense?
Well... Doesn't it get retconned a little bit in the Daily Genesis or one of the other one? Because I feel like this moment gets a little... Either way, the thing is, though, I was not that excited because the characters were not that exciting. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Crosshair, like, he is an interesting character, and I think, like, the solo series with, like, Cyclops, baby Cyclops, and then Crosshair. That was a very interesting. But the thing is, like, from that point of view, I was like, okay, that's kind of neat.
Well, the classic X-Men issue really gives a couple of nice moments here. It gives us a few more moments with the individual X-Men throughout the issue. It gives us a more distinct intro for the Starjammers, who like kind of just got introduced in a flash in the last issue and then saved the day here. So we kind of have a little bit more context of who they are. Plus, Claremont hadn't really figured out how to write them, I don't think, at first. And the classic issue is from after he'd written them many times, so the voices are just like a little bit tweaked. And also he removes this idea that it's the first time Nightcrawler teleported with somebody else, which is a big plot point in this issue. But so many retcons have shown so many times that Nightcrawler have done so many things that in his kind of retroactive version and in revision, he takes that out. But unfortunately, it actually still is continuity. Like very few people actually treat the classic X-Men revisions as the main continuity. So we still have to just think that Nightcrawler forgot about the other times that he...
Yeah. And this was actually something I thought was expansion of like, it's an expansion of like Nightcrawler's power, right? Because initially he's like, oh, you just think he can teleport and you don't think about him teleporting with someone else.
Right.
And then also I think Claremont is beginning to learn how to set boundaries of the powers because the powers cannot just be more and more and more. So he's like, Nightcrawler could teleport with someone else, but the strain could kill him.
Right.
So potentially he couldn't be like, why can't the X-Men just use Nightcrawler as a teleportation device? They just teleport from place to place, country to country, and then and so he
can only go so many miles. He has to match velocity. He can't go into he's definitely figuring that out, which he hasn't really for some of the other characters yet. Which shows I think he's got a deep affinity for Nightcrawler already at this point. I think that bears itself out with how he uses him. But let's roll over into 108, which I think has some more interesting stuff. 107 is mostly just Cockrum flexing that he's going to design all these characters. 108 is where the story gets a little bit more interesting.
But 107 also has this thing that I think Claremont used to do, is that whenever you see other teams from Marvel appears in the panel on X-Men comics, and they look like, oh, it's danger. Oh, this is dangerous. Oh, this is such a big thing. You know that this is a big thing because it really doesn't affect the rest of the titles. They don't cross over that, they don't tie in that much in other titles because X-Men and later on X-Men, New Mutants, Excalibur, X-Factor, they are in the small sub-universe by themselves mostly. And so they don't interact that much outside of the book with other titles.
And this was just the style of the time, right? It was much more stylistic, as we see in the opening scenes of 108, to have Reed Richards and Cap being like, this seems really big, and have them in your book, rather than have a scene in their book to be like, something really big is happening, and then be like, see X-Men. Whereas like, I feel like now we're always expecting people to react in their own books. Yeah. And it's just a different editorial approach to the shared world problem. So I think you're right. Like, this is Claremont, and this is the first time we've really seen this so far in this run, that we've seen the other teams being like, it's such a big threat. Like Wasp is Yellow Jacket, like, what are we going to do? And it's like, oh, I guess only the X-Men are going to be able to handle this.
But the thing is, like, it's also kind of a testament to how far X-Men has fallen since like 2000. And at least when I started reading, is like all the events is actually happening in someone else's book, and then X-Men reacts to them. Before, they were the main, even though it was kind of still on a shaky ground and starting, they were the main focus on Marvel Universe versus they just kind of shifted them. I guess.
Well, it's almost it's almost like a difference in scope, though, right? Like how, like the X-Men has done so much because Claremont's imagination is so big that even if you take this character that's supposed to be all powerful, like the Hulk, and like put him next to the X-Men, like all the stuff that the Hulk has done is like small fries compared to the stuff that X-Men has done. So if you have like World War Hulk, it's like, how do you write the X-Men into that well? And make it seem like it has any weight when anybody who's been reading X-Men is going to be like, this is going to be fine. The X-Men are great, Okay. So it's almost like I mean, this is just my opinion, but it almost feels like over time, Marvel like realized that the scope of the X-Men stories has turned so different than the scope of the rest of the stories that they almost don't blend, which is why people have such vehement feelings about Avengers versus X-Men, because it's like almost propping up the Avengers to be able to handle the stuff that we know the X-Men can already handle. And like, that's part of what's so frustrating about Avengers versus X-Men to me anyway.
Well,
I mean,
not just AVX, right? There's IVX, which was like the worst thing ever.
No, it didn't happen.
I don't know that this podcast and video series acknowledges X-Men continuity that occurs between AVX and Hoxpox. I think we just assume it went right from the end of AVX directly into Hoxpox.
We only acknowledge the plan how Emma Frost and Jubilee takes down Black Bolt. That's the only thing we acknowledge.
And Dazzler, how dare you?
Dazzler, sorry.
Dare you,
Dazzler,
madam.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Those, like, how those two X-women take down Black Bolt effectively. That's the only thing we acknowledge, and we don't acknowledge anything else.
So before we launch, like, fully into this story, right? This is the very first John Byrne Uncanny X-Men issue.
And the feel is different from the second, I think.
Correct. There is actually a little bit of story behind it. And I think I read it somewhere before. It appears that Byrne was the one who championed to, his way into drawing X-Men. And Cockrum wasn't happy about it when he was replaced. So
when he died?
No.
So the note at the end of the issue of the last issue is like, thanks for everything. Right? And it makes and then issue. It's this issue. And Cockrum's like, I'm not dead.
Yeah.
No, and I think the article that I read or I heard, I can't remember where the information came from, was that Cockrum wasn't happy at all. So what he did was this. He told the editor that he wants to remain as the cover artist of Uncanny X-Men. And they agreed to that, which was why I think for a while, Cockrum was drawing the covers to these issues.
Oh,
That's interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but sorry.
No. I mean, my assumption would be like, because he's the cover artist, he got paid the cover artist rate, and then Byrne got paid the interior artist for the pages. I'm not sure how it works then, but but yeah, there was a little bit of a office, politics going on here.
Yeah, and it's kind of surprising, like knowing what we know about John Byrne now. He wanted to be on X-Men.
But he was young then too. I mean, he's like kind of like, this is a good book to be on.
Yeah, and the X-Men star was rising. I mean, Iron Fist was about to be canceled. So it's kind of like, it's hit your wagon to the thing that's popular. Yeah. And this is, so to our point, this is Claremont's first universe-ending odds for the X-Men, right? They've had to stop some nuclear missiles. They've had to fight with some leprechauns in a castle. But like, this is the first big story that he's really delivered. And the scope just feels bigger right away. Like we kind of I don't feel like it was easy to tell in the last issue what was happening.
It was very difficult.
There was there's the McCran crystal, and then the Emperor is kind of mean or whatever. But in here, it really crystallizes. It really crystallizes around like control of this crystal is a bad thing, and if you let somebody insane, get connected with it, it's going to kind of just wipe out all of existence. And this is kind of like a zero-sum game. Like you have to stop him from doing it, and it gets.
Sorry, before you go too deep into things, I just want to add one more tidbit about the artist. This is not the first space opera X-Men story that Cockrum did not finish.
Why? Because he draws the kitty one late. It's not the first one he does not finish. What do you mean?
Because he started this space opera story, right? But Byrne finished it in this issue. He started the Broad Saga, but Paul Smith finished it.
Well, maybe Cockrum is not too enamored with space stuff.
I know.
But the stakes here start to get really much more defined. And as the X-Men are having defeated the Imperial Guard, who are just like, they're done. They're not here anymore. Yeah. They have to fight these guardians of the crystal. And the first one is like a little midget who's just kicking the ever-living daylights out of him. He launches Wolverine into space. But it lets us get this great moment of Jean, again, as her powers continue to increase, plucks a meteor out of space and just slams it on the little dude. And he's still up and running. And then we even get Banshee, who like has a moment of actual planning here and thinks maybe I can overload him with my voice because maybe he's just a machine. And like, I just feel like already we're getting different stuff. Like Jean is using her power differently. Banshee is using his power differently. And it's just like not the same fight. It's thrilling.
A lot more goes on. And then, I feel like a lot more planning goes on. Like, it's just like each one is like trying to attack the same problem in a different way. So, which I think shows also their teamwork a little bit more.
And also, I feel like, and this rolls very quickly into them going into the crystal, right? They defeat the first Guardian, then there's a second Guardian, it's even bigger. They get to the crystal, and it's like the competence of Jean. It's like all of a sudden Claremont has fully figured out how competent and useful Jean is, and it all comes through, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I'm just gonna say this is when I also became a Jean convert.
Yeah, talk about that, because we keep building up how great she is and how much we love her, and you're like, we'll get there, we'll see.
Yeah,
but like you actually sent us a note before this to be like, I'm here.
Yeah.
Right. So the thing is, like, all of this time, it feels like she was just awesome because there was like it didn't seem like earned, or it didn't seem like, okay, why her, the Phoenix kind of got her, and then she kind of had a moment of like, hey, you are not against that the Lang guy, that you're a Nazi, and then all that. But then I think this is for the first time that the whole team were like, oh my God, visions. And she's like, no, we're going to deal with this. We're going to walk through this. And then even though she's also affected, but she just kind of start to realize that she has this power that she can use far more than what she's allowing herself to do at that time. And then she's just going very smartly uses it to get all of them out of there. And I think like it's the I kind of started to like her a little bit when she's like where was it? Eric the Red took Lilandra and then just closed the portal, and she's like, no, I can open the portal and I can get you there. So it kind of started there, but then now it seems like she's also taking some initiatives, and then even like not just taking initiative just because she's the only one not affected, but she's also affected, but she's overcoming it and then trying to help them all out.
Well, this is in line. This is in line with your appreciation of like competence porn, right?
Right.
So she's competent here.
Exactly. And that's to that point though. It's like it feels like not just she's not competent just because she has the power, but she is more because she's figuring it out and then using it. Not just because that, with this, I can only fly or I can only teleport. Yeah. No, she's actually pushing the boundary of her power and trying to do something more.
Yeah. Did you notice something else that Wolverine was taken out earlier too?
Yes. Of course. I've been keeping count of that too. And also, this is like Wolverine. Like, I know that he got the clothes from someone else, but his clothes kind of looks like Sabretooth's. Like. I was
with the necklace thing.
Yeah, with the necklace and everything, even though he kind of got it from...
Well, and Byrne was pretty much at the same time as this issue designing Sabretooth's costume. Yeah, but it's funny because I guess Byrne could have drawn the character model and then Cockrum copied it, but knowing Cockrum, I think that Cockrum drew the model for the character that Wolverine took this costume. So is it like parallel evolution where they actually both drew similar costumes, or is it actually that one of them influenced the other? I don't know. I bet Explain the X-Men knows if you go and listen.
Right. And then I think I didn't mention it when we were talking about the art. It's like, this is also the first time I feel like I'm also liking Storm's face, because the way Cockrum drew her, I did not like it at all, especially when it's like a one panel and then her eyes and everything.
Her face. Her face. Strong eyebrows.
Yeah, like the eyebrows and everything. But over here, it feels like a softer, like a very... very beautiful, and then and the same goes for Jean as well. It's just like from that point of view, it looks like the character. Like I could tell, I'm like, okay, this is when a new artist came, and sure enough.
But these are very classic Byrne faces. So if you read a lot of his work, you will notice. I mean, at least for me, I notice like I latch on to the females' faces immediately. Like, okay, this is Byrne's drawing. So for me, that is what I notice about Byrne's art. The other thing about Wolverine is that I think they still have not figured out that he has adamantium skeleton because he's only 70 kg.
Yeah, I'm like, whoa, that's nice.
That's really light.
Well, while we're still talking about the art, that thing that always...
For our American listeners, that's about 160 pounds.
Something I always notice about the art difference here is that Cockrum has always drawn Jean very much like a fashion illustration. Like she's very thin. She has a small waist. She has a relatively small chest, and she just looks like the kind of fashion illustration that you would just like draw dresses on, across a whole page. And Byrne immediately updates her to this more buxom, larger hips, larger breasts comic character. And it kind of like always like I'm of two minds about it because I do like the way Byrne draws characters in general, but it kind of pisses me off in a way when I get to that panel. It's the panel we'll talk about the whole page probably, where she just has a memory of what happened to her in the space shuttle in issue 100, and then she's kneeling there, and it's like and it's a straight on shot of her, and it just makes me angry. So I'm like, no, Byrne, like she had her own body type. She looked different than all of the other women in comic books, and you kind of just turned her into this rubber stamp woman the way that you would draw any other woman in any other comic. And that always like really kind of frustrates me, even though part of my brain is like, but it's so lovely, because she really did used to have more of a distinct look. But even the next on that page, the thing I find is interesting is that Claremont has Byrne give us a hint of that shriveled up Jean with her Ms. Marvel or her Marvel Girl mask on, which Claremont later expands on in that classic X-Men issue that we talked about. But we like never really got to see what happened in the cockpit really after the end of that issue. But here there's like a little hint of it. So it kind of does show that Claremont always had a concept that something happened. He had to retcon it a little bit more heavily to like make the whole cocoon thing work. But he always did have this idea that there was a scene that played out in the cockpit between Jean and the Phoenix, and that she had physically died, because we can see that he had Byrne draw it here.
Yeah. And,
So, but
and
then
it was
to that-
mentioned a few times too, right, in the dialogue that she died and she came back. She died
Right.
and she came back.
But to that point though, because everyone else is kind of seeing things that didn't quite happen exactly how it happened, but you know,
True.
their fear. So how much is it that it was her fear, not necessarily what actually happened?
Well, Corsair does see, I think, almost exactly what happens, which is
What happened?
which is the Emperor standing over the body of his wife, Claremont, Summer's mother. Whereas Nightcrawlers is more of a distorted nightmare, where we get a replay of his introductory scene in GSX, where the villagers are all crowding around him, but here they're X-Men. So it's kind of interesting that it's like exposing nightmares for some that are nightmarish, and nightmares for others that's more of a truth.
Reality.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's one of the reasons I wasn't sure whether this is really what she thinks happened or that really happened, you know.
But I think it's like Claremont's always trying to establish scope. Like we haven't even seen Magneto do something like that necessarily in the X-Men at this point, where he just snatches something out of orbit and slams it down onto the planet. And so this whole issue is kind of this continual escalation of Jean, right?
Yeah.
So now she gets to the heart of the crystal. The whole rest of the team is relatively useless. She's like, again, going to throw herself onto the sword and be a martyr, just like she did in issue 100. And here we have this great moment where Storm reaches out for her hand and she's like, you're not going to do it alone this time, which I think is a really significant moment for Jean constantly martyring herself, but also for Storm and their relationship together.
I really liked that because, you know, it just like, you know, just use your resources around you. You don't have to be the only one that is like, you know, constantly sacrificing yourself. And it like also like having it happened just a few issues ago, it would have been just a repetition. So from that point of view, I thought that it was, and also like gives them a little bit more context to that one backup issue that we read about Jean and Storm, and then it kind of just all brings it together.
And how wonderful it is that, you know, among all the X-Men, the two women did that.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of different, I think, at that point in time, because, you know, it would be like, Cyclops would be the one that hold her hand and give her power because she's so weak, that she would definitely feel, you know, at that in somebody's hands. And I mean, that would be like the convention in a way. So this sort of plays out in a very, very different way.
Right.
And then she also pulls Corsair into things, and she gives us the rest of the reveal from the last issue that she now has already figured out that he is Scott Summers' father. And the way that it plays out here is that Corsair himself does not even know that that's his son Scott. Why should he? So as she mind melds with him and kind of gives him this information and takes his strength, she reveals to him, but key point, not to Scott, that Corsair is his father.
Well, Scott is like already out though, right?
Yeah. But like we will come away from this without Scott knowing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Scott will not know for a long, long time.
Yeah. And then we get the first kind of full-on Phoenix Raptor effects. We've seen it behind her, even in the fight with Firelord, but we haven't seen the whole kind of massive raptor that dwarves whole, you know, planets and shines through space. And we definitely get this idea like, whoa, Jean is something really different than we thought she was. She kind of knits the crystal back together. She reopens the gate. They go back to Earth. And this whole space adventure is quite suddenly over after all of this buildup. But it has granted us a different understanding of Jean. It's granted us the knowledge of Cyclops' father, which we came totally out of left field. And it brings Lilandra to Earth as a character to play with in this menagerie of X-Men characters.
So when I read this issue again, it struck me as different from how I remember it. Because I've always remembered it as all the X-Men supporting Phoenix, which turns out that it is only here in text and not visually represented.
But didn't you read it in the classic issue? Because in classic X-Men, all the X-Men do.
That's why when I remember it, like the way I remember it is probably because of how many times I read the classic X-Men. and therefore it's sort of like blurred in my mind that that was actually what happened in the original issues. So when I read this again for this podcast and video, I was like, oh wait, what happened to that, to everyone helping her? And then I realized that, oh no, that was the new insert in the classic X-Men.
That's also like very interesting story though, right? Like, rather than like, oh, just two characters, like, just like everyone kind of came together, because it feels like like, as we talked about, this is like the first time it's like a world ending event. It should be all X-Men working together versus just like, oh, let's just put the most powerful. So I think from that point of view, it actually kind of works, what the classic X-Men is doing. I apologize. There's actually a fly over here, so we're not.
Fariha's cat has just completely taken over control of the broadcast here.
Yeah, so we're not be able to move this.
So the other thing too is, I mean, this is a very Claremont beat, like the by our powers combined sort of moment. I can think of at least 3 other times in Claremont's run where like one of his characters kind of plays this out. Sometimes Storm, sometimes it's Jean, but we're given a lot more to it in the classic issue. And it's interesting, in the classic issue, it's clear that the artist of the fill-in parts is not Byrne, but it's I believe the inker is still Terry Austin, and the pages are chopped up, so it's not like some of the other classic X-Men issues where there's like one insert page. They've actually like moved panels on the page to restream it all, and so it actually works really well. Like, it's vague enough that it feels Byrne-esque, and it doesn't totally kind of feel wrong. So again, I think we have a classic X-Men issue that might be the better read than the original issue, except I do not like that they visually tease Dark Phoenix here. They give us a full-on Jean as Dark Phoenix in the red and gold instead of the green and gold, and that I like the narration that from the passion can come either the most wondrous creation or destruction, but I just feel like it's cheating to show us the whole Dark Phoenix now, and it robs the impact of it, 30 issues from now.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
That part I definitely agree.
I didn't know Dark Phoenix, and it spoiled me. No, it's
all right. So look,
but it was like, you are right. It just like, just giving it away. Like, it shouldn't happen.
Yeah, it's almost like he's writing these classic X-Men issues for people who have read it already. But we're going to continue to struggle with that for another 30 issues worth of backup. So look, any other comments about 108 before we move into some of these additional stories today?
It ended so abruptly.
It does end abruptly.
Yeah, it does.
It ended so abruptly. Like, I had to read it twice to kind of figure out if I hadn't missed anything. I was like, oh, wow, wait. And then, Lilandra just dropped by. It's like, yep, this is where I'm going to be from now on. And I don't know if I quite agreed with that.
No, but they did give a good explanation as to why that was the case, right?
Yeah, I think there was like a certain... one time they met each other or something, so it kind of came from that. Like, but no, sorry, they did say that. Oh no, it's because they're still figuring out who gets to be the
legal thing going on,
like legal things and
they're still they're still working out the count and who's going to get to be in charge of the empire. I'm just gonna stay away.
Well, there's some minor story beats here that will come into the forefront in a bit. Like, Banshee has been shown that he's showing some signs of wear and tear. Yeah, he's getting older and is getting tired. And then you have just one small flashback, in the memory. Well, Corsair's memory that Deacon was the killer of Corsair's wife. So that part comes into play, not too much on the forefront, but was later. Do you call it a retcon, or do you call it like something that's added to it in a story that I really don't like?
But it's interesting because that's not an inserted panel. Like, Claremont straight up has it in the original issue. So Claremont's intent was always, because he had to deal with how do you keep Corsair and get rid of What the mom is Kate Summers when
Yeah.
we know that they were abducted at the same time. So I think he gave himself a little seed here, which then he proceeds to hang a lot more plot on, and then people after him continue to hang a lot.
I'm talking
more
about
plot
the people
on.
after him, not Claremont's insert. It was
Hey,
more like
it gave us the best Summers, okay? So like
address your hate mail to Fariha
pointless.
and Peter, because Vulcan is also my favorite Summers.
But it was such a pointless story to bring Vulcan into play.
Oh,
That's the
part.
I don't like that whole story either. But the thing is, but one thing I think I was mostly pointing out like why she gets it, but it's just like the way she says it. It's like, oh, all these things happening, the vote count and stuff. We need to start like our legal team and then Twitter rage and everything. But in the meantime, and I am yours. I know. That.
I don't get that too.
Yeah, where did that came from? That is what I'm questioning, because I'm like, okay, where's that? So I wasn't sure if you guys knew anything about it.
Because in fiction, when their mind touch, and they fall in love.
Oh, from that, okay. Yeah. Well, even in real life, my mind touched with Jonathan Hickman's, and I fell in love. So I understand.
Well, your mind touches his, but his did not touch yours, I think.
Shush, Tyler.
So look,
that's little tiny details. We're still working on that. Okay.
Look, we're gonna just briefly on Iron Fist 15 before we get into these classic X-Men backup issues, because Iron Fist 15 is absolutely the next thing that happens right after this final scene. It actually kind of forgives how abrupt this final scene is, because it lets us have a little bit more denouement after it. Byrne is drawing it. It directly follows this, and it starts with Iron Fist kind of just like in Jean's apartment, because I guess he's going to meet Misty there. But then Wolverine comes in, and he's like, what are you doing here, bub? And then they have a fight, and it just turns into this very kind of lighthearted, amusing, but very visually fun fight between Wolverine and several of the X-Men and Iron Fist, and it all turns out that it's a mistake and that we're actually all friends, and then it turns out that Iron Fist owned the apartment building anyway, so none of the damage matters and everything's fine.
That's so much fun.
I mean, the thing that I sort of was taken aback a little bit, because like Wolverine was calling Jean his girl.
Yeah.
Oh. I didn't read that, by the way, so I'm just going to react to it. I'm just going to react to it as if I read like a clickbait headline. So,
and it is really weird. It's like, because he doesn't really talk about it like that in X-Men, and you read this moment and you're like, what did we just come from? Have I missed some other issues or something? Like, Wolverine wasn't even part of that whole fight in 108, and he starts out this Iron Fist issue being like, why are you in my girl's apartment?
Yeah. And then you had this moment where Iron Fist was like, well, is he talking about Jean? Because Jean is with Scott. And then, is he talking about Misty? No, if he's talking about Misty, then I'm going to fight him or something like that. I was like, what?
So to that point, I'm just going to start this my headcanon that Jean has finally had enough with enough, and she probably read that when that time that Scott called her weakest X-Men. I didn't even talk about it. Like, Jean can read minds, and then now she probably had something with Wolverine in the down low. You know what, girl, go for it.
Okay. So look, if you ever are reading Uncanny X-Men 108 and you feel that it's somewhat abrupt, that is a sign that you should read Iron Fist 15. Yeah. Iron Fist 15 does have some Iron Fist plot in it, but it is the final issue of Iron Fist because Byrne is moving on to X-Men, as we've discussed. So it kind of just really fits well, especially if you just read Iron Fist 14 to get the introduction of Sabretooth. It's part of the whole Claremontian universe. But now let's talk about these two classic X-Men issues and their backup stories in classic X-Men 14 and 15. Both of these backups you could have read way prior, because both of them in terms of continuity fit much earlier than this. And so as you're putting together your X-Men read, sometimes you do have to decide, do I want to get spoiled for something early just because the story fits there, or do I want to read it when it was published? And in the case of these two, I actually think they work well reading when they were published alongside the retros of these issues. So classic issue X-Men issue 14 kind of gives us the details of Xavier's original mind meld with Lilandra, which happens way prior to Giant X-Men Giant Size X-Men, or even prior to X-Men 96, because it's tied to events that happened in the original Silver Age run of X-Men. But we play out pretty much Lilandra's side of the story, that it's in the middle of her potential escape from her captors. It gives us a big backstory with her, and it shows that the mind meld was so complete that actually Xavier was kind of inhabiting her body for a while, and she was confused about why she was a woman and why she was in space and why she had the use of her legs. What did we think about this issue?
I kind of just skimmed through it. I didn't quite pay attention. Like
you weren't totally enraptured by Lilandra's story here.
I mean, not yet. I mean, it's just like, okay, we just saw her, and then, she's like, we had all the story with her and stuff like that. So I just kind of read through it thinking that, okay, it's going to happen. I mean, it is. Like, I wasn't very interested in it. Sorry.
And to be fair, I don't know that we get a lot of, I don't know how to say this. I don't know that we get a lot of reasons that it really matters.
Exactly.
Who Lilandra is, or like why. I don't know that she's ever been a super compelling character to read on panel by herself. And so I think that this issue really kind of suffers from that.
Yeah.
That I think we just know, we already found out enough about her, like
through the flashbacks. Like I don't know that we needed a whole story.
Exactly. Like we already know enough about her, who she is, why she was, she rebelled, she was kicked out, and, she had to did all of those things, which I guess gave us a good enough reason of and now I need to know, okay, what she's doing forward rather than wanting to go backward.
Yeah. But I think the thing that I took away from here is that she handled the whole mind thing much better than Xavier. Xavier was like, oh, I'm going mad, I'm going crazy. And she's like, no, something is happening. I'm speaking from a third person. I'm not supposed to be crippled, but yet I felt I'm crippled. She walked herself into the med lab. She scanned herself to make sure nothing was wrong. She's like, she didn't get on the phone and say, oh, Myra, come look after me. Something's wrong. I mean, it's very different.
Yeah, from that point of view, I can see that. Points to Lilandra.
Yeah.
And also, I think that this is like Claremont interpolating a lot of 70s space stuff into the Lilandra story from a decade later. I mean, there's definitely a very Princess Leia moment at the beginning where she's like, you give me that blaster, right? There's definitely a very Sigourney Weaver and Aliens moment where she scans her own body to try to figure out what's happening. And I just kind of, it was interesting to see Claremont not only revising his story from afar, but kind of like giving it tropes of the period to make it feel like more of the period, even though he's writing it later, which he does a lot. And I just think is a really interesting phenomena. But I don't think there's a whole lot else to say about it.
There's not a lot more.
Not as essential, although the art is really lovely. So
it is lovely.
Now we have Classic 15, the backup story in which is really quite interesting to me, which is the origin of the Starjammers as a group of Starjammers that includes Corsair, and also the origin of Corsair's very strange relationship with Hepzibah. And that Corsair basically has just been doomed to be, he was going to be in the human zoo, but instead he gets just sent to mine a bunch of rocks, and that he's totally lost his will to live. He's lost his kids, he's lost his wife, and he's just there and nothing matters. And that like meeting these rebels that are there to escape kind of helps him find something in himself where he can just be more than a grub. He's just a grub throughout this whole issue. And again, I don't know that Corsair is so interesting that I wanted to spend an entire issue with him, but because of the journey he goes through in the issue, it's a little bit more interesting to me than the Lilandra issue, which starts out with the Lilandra being interesting. And I don't know that the Professor X thing actually changes Lilandra at all in an interesting way. Whereas Corsair definitely changes in an interesting way during the story, I think. Yeah. Do you think that?
No, and then also like it kind of gives like how they get separated, gives the information of that, like how Scott and his brother, what's his name? The boring one.
Alex.
The boring one.
Alex.
Havoc.
Yeah.
Alex. Oh yeah, how Alex and them got separated.
So I don't know, do you want to use human names or mutant names, Fariha?
Oh, either. Whatever. So how they got separated, and then also how everything that happened. One thing that I was kind of cringing a little bit is that in this, how they show that Kate was murdered just in front of him, but in the flashback that he had in 108, it actually shows that she was being raped. Like it was kind of done a little bit differently because, in the flashback she has, it was like she was actually in her lingerie, and then the position of it was very messed up. So but the thing is, we also talked about that, we are not sure whether that's a real or not, or what was it? What was his worst nightmare? So I don't know that part kind of like was like, I'm not, like, and then it's like,
and unfortunately of the two, the one that later writers run with is the skeevier one, which is how we get Vulcan.
Yeah, right. So the thing is, like, the one thing to mention is that they have like 3 mutant children, and neither of them are mutant. So I mean, I don't know. It was just like, how does mutant? That's something that I always kind of thought about, is like, how does mutancy actually works? Because we have seen some cases where one of them is mutant, and then but then this is like a very rare genetic thing that neither of them are mutant, but their 3 children are.
Well, look at the Guthries. I mean, there's how many? And there's a lot of Guthries, and they're all mutants, right? All the kids.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it just kind of like also kind of like, okay, that's not how genetics work. So it's like, what's so interesting about the summers that all 3 of them evolved, but versus like, but the thing is like, the whole, like, not to mention that, I'm just going to sound like a broken record, is like another incident. Maybe I should start counter, someone start the counter of like how many times Fariha pointed it out. Another incident where the mother is killed, but the father is alive. Yeah,
I mean, this is a classic Fridge, right? Let's take the one woman in the family and kill her in such a way to motivate all the boys.
Oh my God. And then, and then also like knowing that what we know that, that goes really terribly, like, for Kate. So, it's just like, gross.
Well, there is also, apart from that, Claremont also inserted something that he wrote for Marvel here, which is John Carter, Warlord of Mars.
Because he has Corsair reflecting on like that kind of world of a pulp hero, and John Carter, before it was a Marvel book, was just like a standard pulp hero. But Claremont did also write John Carter, so it kind of like is a
sort of like internal reference kind of thing.
Nice, and surprisingly, I kind of knew all those because I read so many sci-fi, like in a year for some reason. I'm like, oh, I know these references. so there's that as well.
And for some
also
sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, like, what is Hepzibah's race? Like, what she's
cat,
an alien race,
some kind of
cat.
Yeah, she's an alien.
Yeah,
cat.
Alien cat, like, that just makes Crosshair a furry. That's like gross. Even until to this day, because I think now she's kind of drawn in a little bit differently. Like, that just makes her a little bit more alien rather than
back in the day when you look at how she's originally drawn, she's just like a cat girl. Whereas now she has a kind of very specific look to her.
Yeah.
So look, we're about to dive into a pretty aggressive era of X-Men after this, partially because Byrne is there, partially just because the continuity really flies. So in our next discussion, we're going to be talking about Uncanny X-Men 109 and 110. And there's a bit of a break after 110 where other stuff fits in. So we've already read the backup in Classic X-Men 13 with Misty punching the shark, you might remember, but that actually fits after 110 if you're reading in order. Then we're also going to read the backups in 16 and 17, which were published along with those issues. We might also look at some other backups that fit into this zone. That includes the Spider-Man, Storm, and Power Man anti-drug issue, a classic if you were ever distributed such things when you were in grade school, and also a Marvel team-up issue that includes Havoc. And not that we're going to read this together, but if you want to go to the full reading order guide on Crushing Crisis, there's so much more that can be fit in at this point, including the Uncanny X-Men First Class series that is kind of more of a kid's comic, because it's the only point that you can get Lilandra on the team and Jean on the team all at the same time before the next big sequence of issues. So if you've been saving up anything in your X-Men read that you've been meaning to get to, after our next episode is where to cram them all in. So we will pick back up with Uncanny X-Men 109 next time. And the whole reason we're doing it and the reason we want to pick it up with you is why, Fariha?
X-Men is better when it's read together.
That's right. So we want to thank you so much for listening to another episode of Crushing Comics doing our Epic X-Men reread. Please subscribe if you're on a place where you can subscribe, whether it's the audio version or the video version. And also let us know how you're enjoying this reread. Are we coming down a little harder on these issues than you are, or a little bit easier on these issues than you are, depending on your love of early Claremont and the introduction of John Byrne. So until next time, this has been Peter, Tyler, and Fariha thanking you so much. Be well, and we will see you again for our next episode.